Total War Rome 2 has just recently received the Ancestral update. Currently it's in a beta phase, which you can opt into right now on Steam, and directions on how to do so are in the description of this video. This patch has introduced a lot of stuff, both from a gameplay perspective and a technical perspective. Now I'll post a link to the patch notes below, but I'll run down some of my favorite features from a technical perspective, and then we'll talk about the gameplay changes and how they'll manifest themselves in your campaign. So on the tech front, the campaign has had its textures and lighting improved. There's now MSAA support, improved lighting at nighttime, new water reflections, god rays in foggy weather, the ability to tweak and remove certain graphical elements like foliage, fading troops and dead bodies, cloud shadows, shadow improvements, and performance improvements. All in all, a very unexpected and a very welcome update to the game, honestly bringing it forward a few years in terms of its aesthetic and giving it some options almost now on par with the most recent Total War games. Now before we get into the gameplay updates, I just want to say that this support on the technical stuff is hugely appreciated. None of this stuff had to be done or changed, so I think it's worth praising this patch on that stuff alone. You need to let Creative Assembly know that this is the sort of stuff we want to see with updates for all of their games. Meaningful performance, AI, quality of life and visual updates, as well as new mechanics. With this update they have pretty much guaranteed a purchase of their DLC from me, and that's before I even really know what it is. And that's because I want to show that this update has worked for them financially and it helped push sales. Keep doing these updates and I'll keep spending money. So let's get into some of the gameplay updates. A big one is that after ships unload their troops, they will pull away and move off the map. This feature is long overdue because often a map would fill up with boats and not allow you to land your ships, leaving them stranded at sea. Now you can actually go back and do the original vision of having 2 boats per unit if you wanted to increase the size with a mod, like they originally showcased. You now get a tiny bit of battle loot when you win a battle, and the number is based on the upkeep of the army you defeated. It's a pretty sweet minor addition in my opinion. Agent skills have had a total rework and are now culture specific. I've only really played with the Romans, but their agents have some very interesting abilities, such as affecting loyalty of a party, reducing the ammo of an enemy, bribing a unit to disband from the enemy, and a few other thinking outside the box type abilities. Now in reality, are these going to be used a lot? Not from my experience, but they are pretty interesting, and it makes agents feel a bit fresh and tailored to a specific thing. Generals now also have culture specific skills, and the amount of traits they can have has been increased to 6, so again, it's just adding a bit of replayability there for the different cultures. Nice addition. Next, we move to the big change of the day, and that is the addition of the family tree. Now generally speaking, this is a nice addition, but it's not going to have the effect I think most people associate with a family tree, which is caring about your characters. We'll touch on why that is in a minute, but first let me break down what's going on with the family tree and how it works. So the character screen has had a bit of an overhaul. Essentially now you not only manage your own political party, but you also manage a family that can greatly influence your political standing. The two are actually quite separate. You can have people in your family not in your political party. It gets really messy if that happens, so I'll explain that a little bit later. On the left you can see the other political parties. We can see their influence, regions, and loyalty. We never see their family trees, we don't have to worry about them. You only have your own family to worry about. Now in the center is your family tree. This is where you'll see your lineage. On the right we have other nobles. The other nobles are kind of people in your political party that aren't in your family tree. So for instance, if you hire a random general or a politician to your political party, he'll appear here. These are infinite, they're randomly generated characters, whereas family members have to be born into the family. Now down on the bottom is the new characters section. This can be folded away if you want to see the tree more clearly. Clicking a character here will present them down the bottom. You can see their stats, their skills, their house ancillaries, and their personal traits. You can also see their career. Then there's this big new section called Intrigues. These are 24 buttons that will essentially play around with gravitas, influence, and loyalty, and the governing stats that are authority, cunning, and zeal. Now I have a guide currently for power and politics in Rome 2, which is still largely intact in terms of how things work. If you want to know about gravitas, influence, and all of that, I suggest you go check it out. If I get time in a couple of weeks, I'll redo the guide to include everything with the new intrigues. Instead, for this video, I'm going to be giving you an example of doing something and why you would do something with intrigues. So let's say your family tree is running a bit thin. Here I've only got Scipio with a wife, his son with a wife, and their granddaughter. It's turn 100, so that's not many people to have in your family. Soon Scipio will be dead and we'll lose him and his wife's gravitas, lowering our influence and overall our faction-wide buffs. So to strengthen our position for the future, we need another child in this family. So we'll leave the character screen and recruit a new general. We have a few options, but Dolabella here is the best, because he's actually the weakest. He only has 3 zeal. Dolabella is a brand new auto-generated general who, if we recruit, will join the House of Julia, my house. We can tell that he's brand new because he's going to cost 3 senators. People already in the politics screen don't cost senators to recruit. Now that we've got him, we'll open up the character screen again. We can see Dolabella is now in the other nobles section. He didn't get added to our family straight up because he wasn't born into it. Now we'll still get his gravitas to our political party, but we want him to have children to create free characters for us automatically aligned with our party. We'll also get access to more intrigues with him if he's in our family. So we need to adopt him. Now the adoption intrigue requires the father to have 2 more authority than the target's zeal. Scipio has 4 authority and Dolabella has 3 zeal, so we need to lower his zeal by 1. Now to do that, we can insult Dolabella, publicly desecrating him. Now Dolabella is eligible for an adoption, as his zeal is only now 2. Costing the rest of Scipio's gravitas, we've got him in the family. We can now set him on the path of the curses honorum and make him a tribune, and we can get him a wife. We can also make her an influential woman. These rank increases essentially increase their gravitas, in turn giving us influence in the long run, but lowers the other party's loyalty temporarily. So with that, we've laid the foundation for these two to have children and further our line. Now you might ask, well, why not just do that more? Essentially we can't, as we spent all of our gravitas from our family leader doing it. We'd have to wait a pretty long time to try that again. So that is essentially what intrigues are. They don't seem to ever fail or produce other outcomes, and they don't always make sense, which really makes it feel like busy work if you don't have practical effects. For instance, I had to insult a man to convince him to be my son. I mean, you could probably create a story of why that happened, but it just doesn't really fit in my mind. It just feels like you're manipulating numbers with intrigues. Now there was one called Flirt, which I thought would produce kind of cool events, like maybe create a chance of having a divorce or something, but it seems it's just hard stat changes, at least from what I've experienced so far. The goal in the end is to build your influence up as high as you can go and avoid civil wars. Now you just have more buttons to do that. The system works, though I think they're missing the mark about why people were asking for a family tree. If you remember Rome 1 or Medieval 2, the family tree there is extremely simple. It's simply a reference point for keeping track of your characters. You can't do any intrigue or artificially alter people's stats or traits, it just is what it is, and you can set the heir, and that's about it. So why is that better than what's in Rome 2? Well, the answer is that the family tree isn't better in Rome 1, but the characters are, and I'll break down why that is. Number 1, characters in Rome have an extremely clear and distinct art style. They're usually bright, with vibrant colors and distinct clothing or details. They age when they reach 50, letting you know they're one of your OG characters. In Rome 2, all portraits look almost the exact same. They're kind of ugly, they don't age, they forever look about 45, and they change perspective several times. Sometimes the same character will be looking to the left, to the right, wearing armor, or wearing a toga. This just overall makes recognition extremely difficult at a glance, which is key when you're trying to keep track of 10 or more people over multiple generations. Number 2, characters in Rome 1 live longer. The game moved at 2 turns per year, meaning that typically you had a general from age 16 to about 60, which is around 88 turns. That's a decent amount of time to get to know and recognize a general. In that time, a general can accomplish a lot, like conquering an entire large faction. In Rome 2, generals often get recruited into their 20s or even their 30s. The game moves at 1 turn per year, meaning you've got maybe 40 turns with them. It simply just isn't enough time to form a meaningful bond or do enough meaningful feats with them that you remember them. Number 3, personality and traits were just better. In Rome 1, traits were displayed on a character's panel in a list. You open one screen and you can see that a character is infertile, an idiot, a natural born leader, whatever. These actually have stat effects if you hover over them and you want to see that stuff. I think I very, very rarely ever hovered over that stuff when I played, as I play for the immersion rather than for the stats, and the same went with the units. I just never really read stats, that's just me. The traits were usually obvious stuff that affected their command, management, or influence, which you can just look at a glance again. So this is a hard one to explain to a lot of people, but being able to see at a quick glance what his traits are lets you quickly form a personality for that person, and the traits are earned often by doing something. You leave a person in a town and they'll become a better governor, send them to an academy and they'll become smart or a political animal, conquer a large amount of territory and they'll become a conqueror, and they'll even bear that in their name, Gaius the Conqueror, or retreat from a battle too often and they'll become known as Gaius the Coward. The traits were practical, and even more so, they voiced their traits in battle, in their battle speeches from time to time, which was an amazing touch. Linking the campaign to battle is what made Total War in a league of its own. In Rome 2, the traits all look the same at a glance. You then have to hover over the trait to see what it is. This in itself is just something people are not often going to do. And if you're the type of player that does hover over these things, chances are you're looking to see what the stat is and not what their personality is. Names don't change with actions, and traits are often random regardless of actions. again, losing the personal connection you form to a character. The speeches are also complete garbage, and very limited in scope. Number 4, Man of the Hour and Lineage. In Rome 1, if your family leaders died, then your game was actually over. This was a big incentive to keep people alive and to recognize them further, as you could potentially lose if you didn't keep an eye on them. You'd occasionally get random people married into the family, and bribes and a few other things let you gain more characters to use in the campaign. One of the best features was when fighting a tough battle, you might trigger Man of the Hour and get a general who comes from the ranks of the army. There was something very satisfying about getting that general into your family and eventually to leading the country. In Rome 2, there's a bottomless pit of generals. If your family tree runs out, you just get new people into it. This de-incentivizes the player to care about their tree and characters, as they can easily be replaced. There's no Man of the Hour, there's no bribing foreign generals, so it's all just a bit stale. So those are the reasons that characters are just fundamentally boring in Rome 2, and why a family tree just doesn't bring back that magic from the old games. It's sad to see, because it seems like Creative Assembly just kinda don't really get it. They've changed civil wars and politics in Rome 2 3 times now, and this is the 4th time they're altering it slightly with family trees, but they're just missing the mark of what's actually missing from the game, which is meaningful characters. Now don't get me wrong, as I said earlier, this is a good patch. It's added a bunch of stuff that updates the game to be more modern, and the family tree in politics so far seems like a nice, dynamic little side game that's certainly better than it was before. I had some interesting developments in my campaign where my son created his own political party and then later had a civil war, so currently he's in my family tree, but recognized as another faction, and we're fighting. I mean, that's pretty cool, and that's a very dynamic system that it's handled that situation. I invested a lot of gravitas and money into him being married, having children, and that's all gone now, because I didn't control his party well enough. The story sounds cooler than the reality of the gameplay to that, but even so, you can imagine that if you got my 4 points back on track, this could make the game really live up to its predecessor in many ways. Just then throw in some population mechanics, make auto-resolve work how it did in Rome 1 without a predetermined result and maybe a bit more of a dice roll in there. Fix the characters as I mentioned, throw in some more diplomacy options, clean up the AI just a bit, and you've got a 9 or 10 game in my opinion. That does actually sound like quite a lot, but hey, that's what they gotta do. Anyways, let me know what you think of the update. The DLC has had some leaks, but I'll just wait until I play it to talk about it. Again, like I said, I think it's a great addition to the game, and if we get more support for it, I hope they pivot towards some of the features I mentioned. Let me know what you think is a priority for the game. Thank you as always to the patrons and support on the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.